Hi, welcome to our first edition of Connecting the Dots. We are starting a monthly series that is literally going to take a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the larger issues we see in the global economy, within our industry, and basically trying to get a little bit deeper to hopefully inform you to run your business and run your life a little bit better. I'd like to welcome and thank Meaty Nix, who is going to be handling this conversation with us, and you'll be seeing her on a monthly basis, and she is one of our very talented writers in a lot of the work that we've been doing beyond the meeting room.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's great to be here to talk to you today. And what I would like to hear from you is what we'll be discussing in the first 3 months of the year. What's the most important topic that members should know?
Yeah, well, there's quite a few things that I think we're going to be looking at. First and foremost, and it's probably not a surprise, is the economy and what that is really going to look like. You know, we've spent 2.5 years talking about a recession. Are we going to be in a recession? Not in a recession. Now you're hearing soft landing. You're now hearing Goldman Sachs saying we only have a 15% chance of being in a recession. It's all good news.
Good news.
But you have chaos around the world. We're a global economy. I think there's a lot of things that we have to figure out, but in the first quarter, I am pretty bullish and optimistic that things are lining up for us to have a soft landing. Soft landing in its simplest terms, and we hear that word often, or that expression. A soft landing in its simplest terms means we're going to be able to get inflation down without crushing the employment picture. And we're seeing that. Most economists believed when this started, we were going to have to get to 7 to 8% unemployment before inflation would start to move negative. That's not the case. Inflation is actually moving, not as fast as the Fed would like, but it is moving the right direction. And labor is actually held and has been surprising each and every month. So that's encouraging. We still find a resilient consumer. I am one that sometimes thinks that some of our behaviors and our buying patterns have changed dramatically since the pandemic and possibly forever. And when I think about that, it's really one of those things that when something is taken away from you, you start to value it even more. And the ability to travel, the ability to go out, the ability to connect, you're finding this in an overwhelming sense that actually doesn't coincide with what we see with an economic picture. This what keeps surprising everybody.
Right.
You know, I joke that how many times are we going to hear about the surprising resilient consumer? Well, maybe they're resilient because of what we've gone through over the last few years, and that people are really, you know, we talked about revenge travel coming out of this. They're now talking about revenge spent. Is it revenge, or is this just our new pattern? That we understand we deserve it, we understand we can, and I think the interesting part is because unemployment hasn't skyrocketed and hasn't really moved, people have jobs, we have excess savings, the market is doing okay. So we fill wealth. And by the way, housing is through the roof. So the value of my home has gone through the roof, which makes me feel even wealthier. I just think there's a whole bunch of things lining up that's making the consumer feel really good. And that's positive for our economy across the board.
Right. Well, maybe let's drill down a little bit more into what one of our other topics will be, which is what that means for the hotel industry.
Yeah. The hotel industry, you know, we actually have had a bifurcated recovery through all of this. And that bifurcated recovery is simply the metro cities were lagging the resort communities. The resort communities have now fully recovered. They did over a year ago. And what you're finding is a little bit of a softening in the resort community, but the metro urban markets are growing and growing substantially. You know, the top 25 markets in the United States are all urban metro areas, and we need health in that space to have a healthy hotel industry. We finally have health in that space, and we're seeing it come back. They're still going to lag just a little bit because of international traffic. We're only at about 80% of our 82% to be exact of our international audience of 2019. So we're still missing some of that, and most of it's Asia, but everything else is semi-recovered, and that is a good place for us to be. Compression in our industry is not going to be relaxed anytime soon because we don't have any new supply to speak of in the meetings and events world. We have a lot of hotel supply coming in, but much of it is limited service. And that limited service hotel isn't going to help reflects the meeting space compression that we've seen. Everybody is now tracking for record group numbers. We're starting to see that across the board. And I think there's an underlying piece that we're missing that when we look at the recovery of our industry and what that looks like, what we tend to forget are the new small and medium businesses that candidly drive our economy that have been born over the last 3 years.
That's true.
And if you looked at some of the reporting around business travel, for instance, the business travel commentary had always been, okay, if you talk about my large international or multinational companies, they have all pulled back on business travel, but my small to medium businesses were up double digits. And that's kind of a miss because it makes up for a lot of what's shrinking and sometimes makes up for some of the narrative in that regard. That small to medium business, and my whole point to that, that's even adding more compression to the meetings and event space because these are all new companies with new.
They haven't been there before.
Not at all. So it is incremental and additive to what was norm. And you just saw it as we just came out of IMEX, record numbers. And what you're going to continue to see are record numbers as we continue to move forward. We see it in live events. We see it in professional events. We see it in live music. Everywhere you turn, it is record attendance. And I go back to a point earlier. I think part of that is kind of embedded in us forever now. Because of
we want the experiences.
We do, and it was taken away from us where we could not do it. And I think there's that little bit of an innate fear as human beings that I don't know when it could be taken away again. Right. So I need to be able to enjoy it and take advantage of it as much as possible. One thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, this summer we saw a softness in domestic leisure demand. That softness specifically in the resort areas, we saw a softening, I should say. One of the things we did see is what we are now terming revenge international travel this past summer. And we had 2 million more Americans going out of the country than we had back in 2019. Most of it, surprisingly, I thought it would have been Europe. It's the Caribbean that grew. The Caribbean was up almost 18% to 2019 numbers.
Why the Caribbean?
If you think about beach resorts and you think about during that time frame, you could have gone to the Bahamas, but you had to test every 2 days. And by the way, if you tested positive, you were stuck for a while. That was a little bit of a challenge, but all that was taken away from us. And it's the summertime that we saw that. So when you say the Caribbean, why the Caribbean? Because you want to be in beach resorts in the summer. You tend not to basically hit Europe when it's been really hot in the summers. So you tend to do the beach. Now, Europe was up, but it was only up 5%. It was a surprise to me that the Caribbean was up 18%. But what makes sense now is the softening we saw, a little bit of softening in Florida, a little softening in the resort community. The resorts very much feel like the Caribbean. It's the same audience. So, but I only mention that because we think it's temporary. That shouldn't be long-lived, but that's why it was that revenge travel. Just like we saw the revenge leisure domestic travel the year before.
Right. People had to get that out of their system, and they'll probably go back to what they were doing before.
Exactly. Yeah, I say this often. You know somebody, or you personally went to Europe or somewhere international this past year.
That's true. I did.
Yeah, everybody did. I did too. And it's because we hadn't had that ability for a couple of years. So I think all of that's going to normalize by next year. And that's what I'm most encouraged about 2024. I think we're going to hit some normalcy as far as cycles and patterns, which helps us be able to forecast a little bit better and more effectively and be able to run our businesses better.
Well, one of the other things we're going to write about is supply and demand. Could you address what you're seeing there or what you expect for 2024?
Yeah, without a doubt. We don't see much of a drop-off in demand. And candidly, it's a lot of business travel that is now normalizing, but group travel is really starting to move that. Interesting that the latest STAR data that we've seen, you'll see that our increases are on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays of the week. Well, you don't increase midweek without it being literally group and business travel. Right. So that's very encouraging for us, and all those markers are moving the right direction. American Express just released their global business travel forecast for next year. They're showing double-digit rate increases in most of the major metro areas, being led by the Chicagos and the Bostons of the world. Boston's been on fire when you look at it from a rate perspective and occupancy perspective. So we're starting starting to see a lot of demand in the major metro areas. And that's the only place we were light in our recovery. So that's, to me, very, very encouraging across the board, because as those areas tighten up, our second tier cities will get even busier than they are today. There are challenges, but from a forecast on the demand side, I think it is fantastic. We're well behind the supply curve of what we would normally have in an upcycle, and I don't see that changing in the current rate and borrowing environment we're seeing. It's not the easiest thing to get money to build a project at the moment, or you'd wait until, because I think there's a great anticipation that rates will start to come back.
Interest rates will come down later in the year.
Yeah, at some point. Yeah.
So what are the second tier cities that will be seeing increases?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and it's probably not a surprise that you've seen the St. Louis and the Louisvilles of the world and the Oklahoma cities really start to explode. But if you look at what continues to pop up on the radar, Raleigh, that Raleigh area is on fire right now. And I actually mentioned this recently, that I think Raleigh to me is Nashville 12 to 15 years ago. They're about to expand their center. They're going to have a new anchor hotel that's going to be on there. They have new luxury product coming in. They've really worked on the downtown experience. Those type of second tier cities, I think, are just ready to explode. And it's fun because we're getting knocks on the door about what these could be. And our second tier cities are already doing well. I'm looking at the emerging ones, the ones that are going to be kind of haven't been on the radar, and I think are going to be really, really popular. Knoxville has come up. Knoxville, Tennessee has recently come up on what that can do as a destination. And it's these destinations having a little bit of vision as far as what they want to do in an entire experience within the city that I think makes it a little bit fun. But, I surprisingly spoke at a Grand Rapids, program for their CBB. And it's not a surprise that I spoke there, but it was a surprise that the destination was just on fire. And it's this really small community that you really don't know much about. And I didn't know much about. And I learned, this is a place I would come back to. And it was new for me to learn, but the experience was really good and how it was all put together. So I think that's going to be, there's going to be a lot of different emerging markets. I do think the Oklahoma cities and the Louisvilles of the world and all of those type of destinations, they're going to continue to show strength. Mm-hmm. The challenge we have is always going to be about lift and airlift into the second tier cities, because our airlines are still a little challenged, not the airlines, but they're challenged with planes and what routes we can add, because we're behind in plane delivery by Boeing. That's really what's dragging the airline industry back right now. That and trained FAA actually employees, and we don't want
pilots.
Yeah, well, the pilots have actually resolved itself, and they have a great pipeline. The biggest issue this past summer, like when you saw flights that were coming back, those flights were actually being pulled because we don't have enough FAA people and trained, fully trained. Now, and by the way, we don't want a partially trained air traffic controller in a booth. That was the challenge. So, when you saw the flight issues we had in New York, and when that all pulled back this past summer, those flights being pulled back had to do with air traffic control. And even when we shut down the airports, when we had storms there, that had to do with air traffic control, not the airlines. And that usually you have enough air traffic controllers that with a storm, you still have enough talented people to be able to move the flights around. With these storms, we didn't.
Will that resolve itself in 2024?
Not in 2024, but it's getting better every month. That's the way I would look at it. It's not going to fully resolve itself, but there is an emphasis and candidly some good work by the U.S. Travel Association. There is an FAA reauthorization bill that just went through. That was an important one because it provided funding around literally modernizing that area and personnel and training, which is very, very necessary for us.
Well, this has been just great, and it's just a little taste of what folks will be seeing and reading in the coming year.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to a great 2024.
Yeah, me too. Like I'm overly bullish, and not in a Pollyanna way. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention there's challenges around the world. The geopolitical situations around the world do concern me, but we don't know what that means and what that looks like until we emerge with some resolution in either one of the wars that are currently being faced, around the world, and what that means to Chinese policy, trade partners, alliances. All of that's going to have to settle at some point to know exactly what it means. And I think anybody guessing right now would be that guessing.
Just a guess.
It is. And that's the only piece that, I talk about being bullish. The caveat is everything staying status quo. Some things going even a little bit crazier around the world could change all of that. But thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.